Hello and welcome to Modern Infrastructure Wednesday. I'm your host Lee Zen from Pulumi Corp. Today we're going to be talking about building a modern web app. This is the first part of many parts. I had a recent request on one of the YouTube comments asking to build a longer, kind of more in-depth example around building a web application with a front end, a back end, how to hook up all that infrastructure, how to actually have the API talk to the front end and all that jazz. So we'll be walking through this in multiple parts. Today we'll be going through the first section of this, which is to create a React application, publish that React application to AWS, just hosting that statically, connecting that application to a domain name, and then in the next parts, we'll then focus on how to actually build the API, hook that API up to the front end, and then have that front end actually make writes to a database. So yeah, let's just get going. So I have a terminal window open here. We're gonna first do our typical Pulumi new. I'm in an empty directory right now. So we'll just go with the defaults here. We'll call this a modern web app. Why not? And sure, we're in the dev stack. And we'll stick this into US 2. So I actually blown away a lot of my node caches, I think, so this probably can take a little bit longer. While that's installing those dependencies, we can actually jump into index.ts. And we're going to blow this part away. We don't need any of that. We're also going to create a React application, right? So we can npx create React app. Call this just app. All right. Let's see how long this takes. All right, this will take a while. So while that's going on, we can kind of get our infrastructure set up. What we're going to end up doing is we're going to build the app, and then the application is going to, we're going to have a way to make a production version or a build version of that app, and then that build version we're going to want to then push up into AWS and then have that served. We're going to use API Gateway actually, because that way that'll allow us to then later on add on the other routes that we care about from an API perspective, and then we can hook that API Gateway up to a domain name. So we're going to try to do most of that in this tutorial in terms of the actual setting up. A lot of the actual setup on the API Gateway stuff is actually a lot of our examples. So we can actually kind of just copy and paste from some of those if we want to be expeditious about it. But then otherwise, we'll just be walking through kind of a lot of the setup here. So let's do that. So first, let's actually make sure this React app stuff works. So it's yarn start. And let's see if this actually, just setting the web server, and this should hopefully load up. Okay, great. So that worked. Excellent. So let's kill this. And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually build. And then that's going to actually that should create a directory that we can then deploy from. So let's look here. So you can see that we have this build, and then this has everything we want. This is our quote unquote production build. So let's do that. So what we want is we want to create an API gateway, and let's do that first. So let's call it API. Let's see what we want to give it. So we want to give it some routes. And I believe there should be an array. And we're going to give it our first route, which is just a local path. So this you can see here on the docs here. It says we're going to point to some local directory. So in our case here, it's going to be app build. And then the path we actually care about on the web server side is going to be slash. And let's see if there's any. I don't think we need anything else here. I guess give it a get. And we don't need, I don't think we should need anything else. So by default, it's going to serve index.html. That's what we want. We don't need any of the requester stuff. We maybe later on, if we have time, as I go through this multi-part series, we can add some, authorization and things like that. But for now, let's just see if this works. And so we want to get the API's URL back. Oops, let's do this. So let's see where we are. Now we're in app, so we'll come back down, and we will Pulumi up, and let's see if this works. So what this should do is it should take the local path, which is the production build I just made, and then put that into an API gateway with a path of / and allows me to get any of those objects. So let's see, this is going to create all these objects, which looks right, with the API, and yeah, that looks good. Let's try this. So yes. Oh, interesting. Now it's fewer issues. Huh. Okay. Well, let's try this. Let's try actually just going ahead and adding the rest of the things first, even though that might not be the best, since we actually don't know if this is working correctly or not. But let's at least try adding the domain name to see if that works as we would expect. And then assuming that does, then we can come back to see what's going on with these permissions issues. So what we want to do there is we want to actually, I believe, if I recall correctly, the way this looks in API gateways, you basically have a base path mapping to create that domain name, and that way you can end up connecting that to a DNS. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm actually going to look up a quick example to reference here. Let's go to the examples repo. I don't remember how to do this off the top of my head. Let's see. I believe we have a API gateway example here. Yes. Let's see if this does what we want in terms of, oh, no, it does not. Here. Maybe this one. Is this API gateway? It does not. Oops, let's go back. No, okay, there's no example like that. Just kidding. For some reason I thought we actually had an example of that. Okay, so we're gonna build this. We're gonna actually build this from scratch, which is cool. Let me just get something else open here. Okay, so oops. Right, so we want, I believe, yes, we want a custom domain name, so the base path mapping. So this will ensure that it's created. Okay, so we actually use, right, I should just use example here. So let's do this. So we're going to copy most of this stuff. So we need this here, this domain name. And we need that. So let's do this. Okay, so we're going to create this domain name. So we'll call it webapp.pulumi.tv. And this actually expects a domain name, and I believe, let's see, you can also give it a certificate. So we're gonna provision a certificate using a certificate manager. So we've done that before in other examples. I'm just gonna put a thing here for now. Oops. And we'll call this. Okay. So how do we get that certificate? So let's create a certificate, and we're gonna actually have to create a provider in US East 1 because we want this to be global. And for that to happen, it has to live in US East 1 to connect to CloudFront correctly. I think. Let's actually try to see what happens if we don't do that first. Let's just try to create a certificate. But I think you do have to do that the way I described. But let's try. So we can give it a domain name. And then we want to validate that we actually have this domain name. So we will do we have to get the zone. So we're going to give it the name of the zone, which is Pulumi TV, so we can actually do something with it. We'll treat this asynchronously, and so we can actually turn this into an output. So we can give this actually a promise like this. So if we actually look at the type of HCID, you can see it's a output of this zone. Okay. And like this. Okay, so now this is actually what we want. So this should be the zone. Yeah, this is a string now, which is great. So this is the zone ID as an output. So we can feed that into our record. So we have to create a record to validate that we actually own this domain. So validation record. And we have to give it a name. So this will come from the certificate. Domain validation options. It's just the 0th one, and it's going to be the resource record name. And there's a type. And it's going to be the same thing, but it's the resource record type. And then finally there's a value. Oh, we have to have the records, of course, the actual records themselves. No, I think this is just a list. This is about array. Ah, yes, array of strings. Okay, great. So we just give it the actual. So we need to do this. It's just certificate. Certificate value, and we give it a TTL. Let's give it 60 seconds. I'm missing something. Zone ID, of course. We have to tell what zone it is. So we give that. We had that earlier. All right. And then we can wait to see if this is actually created. So we can do a and this is that special. I think we talked about this in a previous episode where we have a certificate validation. This is just a special record to tell us that we actually did have what we expected. So we actually this document actually has an example. We create the certificate. Oh wait, a good thing is I caught this. We should add this to our thing. We get the zone. We create the record, the validation record, like here, and then we actually go ahead and create this resource to verify that we actually have what we want. So let's actually just copy that, and here we can do, and this is the previous this is the validation record. So we also, as I mentioned, we wanted to do this. Okay, so let's basically make sure this actually works. So this should create the certificate we wanted, so we can use it for our website. And then we're going to get the zone that we're going to stick that record into. Oops, I typed this wrong. And let's see. Oops, I had all this code down here that I haven't used yet. So let's fix all that too. So we have this. And then, okay, so now we're going to do the actual base path mapping, which we forgot about. So this is the certificate ARN. You see it, this is the certificate.arn. And we should also make sure actually, so we need to actually depend on this validation to exist. So you can see here, we depend on the certificate, we don't depend on the validation having happened yet. So we need to actually add a depends on clause here. Cert. So what we're doing here is basically, earlier we created, so let me just, feel like we did a lot actually in the last couple of minutes. Let me back up. So we created this API Gateway thing, which we did a long time ago. And we said, okay, we actually want to hook that up to a domain name. So I said, oh, well, to do that, I need a certificate. So I created a certificate. And to prove that I can actually create a certificate for this name, I need to actually validate with DNS. So I go fetch the hosted zone, and then I go create the record to prove that I actually own this domain. And we have this special handy thing that basically tells us that, yep, indeed, Certificate Manager has validated that it's issued a certificate for our domain. And then we depend on this validation before we go ahead and create this API Gateway domain name. And then finally, we just have to map, this domain name. We'll call this web app, Pulumi, call it API Gateway custom domain. And we have to map this custom domain now to our actual API. Because you can see here, there's no mention of the API we created at the very beginning. This is just a abstract custom domain you can use with any API, an API Gateway. So we'll call this domain mapping. And we can point at the API we created earlier. And be the REST API. This is the ID for the REST API, and then we can give it the domain name. So this is the API Gateway custom domain, and then this is the stage name of the API. So this is API stage. And oh, does this not match? This is a string. This is the stage. Stage name. All right, so let's see if this works. The only thing I'm not sure about, I think this should work. The only thing I'm not sure about is whether or not that certificate needs to actually be created in US East 1 for these domain name mappings, but we'll find out in a sec, I think. So let's see what we're going to create here. We're going to create the cert, the record, that validation thing, and then these mappings. So let's say yes. So while we're waiting for, let's see if this actually, this does not fix itself. So I'll have to investigate that, as I mentioned, after this. I think it may also have to do with the fact that it's just coming in off of this path. And you can see this is not really the slash. The static stuff is not, off that path necessarily. So that's the other thing I have to investigate. Okay, so as I suspected, this has to be in US East 1. So let's go ahead and actually let's fix that. So we have to create a provider that's in US East 1 specifically to do what we want to do. So US East provider. Give it the region. Oops, what happened there? And then we can feed this provider into this stuff. So here, give it the provider, US East provider. And then here, actually, Route 3 always talks to US East just because. And here, this doesn't not regional resource, so we should be able to do this. And now I should create the certificate in US East. You can see this is the create for the one in the East. And then we're going to have to replace all these things since we're changing the whole dependency chain there. Oh, okay, interesting. I tried to just use the certificate before it was placed. Because okay, so this is because this actually does depend on this new certificate, this new provider based thing. So I think I should have actually gone and updated that to use the other providers. I think if I just do this, it should be okay. Yeah, this should be okay. And so we can see now it's going to actually try to do this replacement here. Let's see. Let's try actually doing this then, like I said. Because yeah, that certificate validation actually has to, I see, right, because the certificate validation is going to talk to the certificate manager to verify that we actually were issued the cert. So it does actually rely on being in the correct region. So that's my mistake. I should have realized that earlier. Now I should be able to actually determine that we were or were not issued the certificate, and then proceed the execution as expected. So this is taking a while. I wonder if it's because I also, oh, there we go. All right. I was about to say, I wonder if it's because I'd created that Ref53 record, and so it was cached or something like that, but it seems like that worked. So let's see if that actually lets me do webapp.pulumi.tv. Oh, that's not what I expected. Let's do a quick look here. Right, that looks like, right, those should give me back different IPs, right? This is the CloudFront distribution, which by default directs us to our beautiful YouTube page, and this should be what looks like an API Gateway address. So that, I think, should work. Not sure why. I wonder if my browser has the URL cache. Let's curl this ourselves. Oh, nope, that's still giving me the redirect. Interesting. Oh, silly me. I did all this, and so yes, okay, I'm being silly. So the API Gateway will accept traffic from webapp.pulumi.tv, but I actually never created the record webapp.pulumi.tv, so we should go do that, right? So route webapp record. And we now create another record. We'll call this the web app record. And this time, the name is webapp.pulumi.tv. I believe actually this can just be this. It doesn't have to be a fully qualified domain within the zone. It can just be the name within, just the name. And then we'll give it a 60-second TTL. And actually, there should be an alias to the API Gateway. So the type is should be an alias. And here. So, let's see this. Conflicts with TTL and records. Okay, right. So we don't need any of this. And check something else. this is actually an A record alias. So let's see, and of course don't forget zone ID, and that was the HC ID we had earlier. And here we'll actually, oops, this should be an array, right? And we'll have in alias 2 the actual name from the API Gateway. And I believe there should be something here for us. Should be in the, sorry, should be in the, yes, CloudFront domain name. So this is the distribution now that we use for this. And then there's the zone ID. And that's the CloudFront zone ID. And we obviously want to pass through the health of the underlying target. So, okay, so this is the record I forgot that would actually route web app correctly. And what this is going to do is it's going to point the web app record at the custom domain name we created earlier. So let's do that now. So this should create one record, which it does. And I'll probably have to clear my DNS cache to make that work. All right. So let's actually take a quick look at the stack itself, make sure this is what we expected. So if we look at resources, we should have this record, which we do indeed. Okay, so now let's try that again. Okay, it's still cached. Let's try, what's the command to, it's like mdns, there we go. I believe you had to pass no up as well. That's hot, sorry, what am I doing? Yes, we need to do this. Okay, I think that should hopefully do it. No, still doing that. All right. Let's check that record again. Wonder if the other TTL is really long, actually. Oh no, that's an A alias as well. This actually should be 60 seconds TTL. This should be 60 seconds TTL. So actually should be pretty straightforward in terms of how long TTLs last. And yes, this is a wild card, but the more specific name should always win over the wild card. At least that's, in principle, how RapidDB should work. But that does not seem to be doing what I wanted to do. Let's actually go back and try to use that CloudFront distribution directly and see what happens. So we have this. Let's see if we go to this. Yeah, okay, that's what I expect. So this is the API Gateway, and if we go to like stage, not sure why that doesn't work, but but this actually does do what I think it does. I wonder if come back here. Oh, I wonder if this is not, nope, this is mapping to the stage name. This is all right. So this should point me straight at the stage, and I shouldn't have to actually add anything additional to the path. At least I don't expect it to. Let's double check that. Oh, wait, this is the, interesting, we indexed the .NET documentation there first. Let's see. Did this. So our stage name was, we actually gave it the stage name. And I don't think I need this. Shouldn't need the deployment because it's already deployed. Let me check that as well. Yeah, there's a deployment that's part of it. That we do that as part of AWS X, so that should just work. What if it's just caching and I'm just having a weird day? No, it's not it. Oh, I wonder if I just realized that the previous response was a. Let me just do some in private browsing here. There we go. Okay, I knew I was going crazy. I was like, I realized what happened was my browser had cached at 301. Okay, so now this is yes, of course, Lee. Browser caches exist also, right? So yeah, so the browser had cached the 301 response from the previous time I chose to go to webapp.pulumi.tv. Obviously, in an incognito session, that is not the case. We don't have the same cache. So okay, so this is doing what we expected it to do. So great. Now we are actually at the end of where I was hoping to be at the end of today. Sorry it took a little bit extra time to get there. Let's just review the roundabout way in which we got there. Right. So what do? We first created this API gateway, which creates this route that maps the local build path. So we actually did very little React today. You'll recall at the very beginning we did the npx to create React app, and then we went into that directory, and then we ran yarn build, which created this build directory with the application fully packaged up. That then allowed us to shove this, basically this using AWS X automatically just puts this into an S3 bucket and maps the slash path to that bucket for us. We then created a certificate using the US East provider that we created so that the certificate exists in the US East 1 region. And then we validated that we owned that domain name with ACM so that it would issue the certificate to us. And then once the certificate was validated by ACM, we were able to map that certificate onto a custom domain with API Gateway, map that custom domain to the API that we created, and then finally the step I forgot, which caused all the issues because then I ended up caching the 301 and everything, but then you finally create this Route 53 record which points the name you wanted, web app, at the actual custom domain name that we created for the API Gateway. And so at the end of all that, we can actually export the name here, though we actually constructed it by hand, so we actually know what that is. But we'll just we'll do that anyways. We'll call it the actual site URL. So we'll call this the API URL, and we'll export the site URL to be the web app record fqdn. So, and we'll just do Pulumi interpolate. Right, so let's run that. And then while that's running, let's do this for now, yes. As we can see, the API URL is that thing, and now we have this, which gets us, oops, this is not in the right browser window, but in the incognito browser window where I don't have that cached, we have this. So let's actually go and make a change and see how that works real quick, and then we'll end today, and then we'll continue on next week in terms of modifying this application to be able to do something interesting with state, and then create a API to handle taking that web app's API call, and then we'll plumb that through to actually managing the state in Dynamo or some other underlying database. So real quick, let's go and modify the file here. So it says, hey, saved. So we'll call this, I made a change, and we'll go to this and build. And you can imagine totally automating all the stuff I'm doing here, right? Like we can imagine, in a CI/CD environment, it will just run yarn build from this directory, and then it'll then do a Pulumi up after the yarn build is done. And then, it'll then say, okay, here are the things that are changed and what we need to actually up. As you can see, it's exactly what it's doing. It's saying, okay, these things changed within the bucket objects, and we're going to go upload those things. So we have 3 new files to create, 3 to update, and 3 to delete. And so it's pushing the new changes, and actually we actually delete the old files that we no longer use, which is pretty cool. And if we reload this, I made a change. Great success. Cool. I hope you enjoyed watching today's episode. Next time, like I said, we'll go through the rest of the example as far as we can in terms of hooking it up to an API gateway in terms of the actual Lambda functions that we'll use for the web app. I hope you enjoyed watching today. Please follow us on Twitter, subscribe, and like this video. And as always, please leave any comments for future episode ideas or whatever else you want to talk about. And of course, if you want, you can find me on Pulumi Slack channel as well.